Hi, friends. I am Marie Woods, founder of Life Above Foundation, your host, a professional counselor, family and marriage therapist, and a wholeness life coach. Welcome to Relationship Real Talk, the podcast where we dive deep and tackle the toughest relationship challenges Christians face today. Are you tired of struggling with unforgiveness, past wounds, and conflicts? Feeling lonely or having trouble communicating? Wrestling with trust issues or trying to balance your faith with your relationship goals? Feeling stuck and stagnant in your relationship? You are in the right place. Here at the Relationship Real Talk, we get real and cover a wide range of topics, including relationship anxiety, trauma bonds, infidelity, estrangement, toxic dynamics, dating after divorce, and how to heal from relationship trauma and grow and build healthy and lasting relationships. We're not just about identifying the problems. We're all about finding real, integrated solutions from multiple disciplines and offering professional help from different fields to mend and strengthen your relationships. So, let's get started on this journey together, one honest, heartfelt conversation at a time. Dr. Diana Robbins. She is a licensed professional counselor located in Houston, Texas. And she finished her PhD from Regent University, and her dissertation is focusing on called Building Resilience, Parents of the Exceptional Children. So today we have a really interesting topic that Dr. Diana, she is going to talk to us. It's called estrangement. So before we dive into this topic, Dr. Diana, would you be able to tell our audience why is this topic?
Well, I think this topic is really important because we know that rates of estrangement where family members, go for periods of time without much contact or involvement in one another's lives is really growing and expanding in our culture. There's been a lot written about it, and it happens in Christian environments as well. And it's an important topic for us to look at.
As a therapist, many times because we do what we do, somehow it connects with our own personal experience and life story. So if you don't mind, would you tell our audience what's your personal story behind and relate to this topic?
Sure. So this is the first time I've really spoken very openly about it. I think for a lot of years, I felt a deep sense of fear and shame around talking about my own personal experience with estrangement. And I think many people that experience it, especially Christians, feel the same way. Often it makes it difficult to receive support if we don't. So I hope this episode will help others, feel free to share and reach out and get the support that they need. I think for me, I look back, early in my life and see that the seeds of estrangement in my family were there for a very long time. And I grew up in a Christian home. My father was actually a pastor, and had a very strong commitment to biblical truth. We talked about the Bible in our home all the time. We were always at the church, and I never would have expected that estrangement would be an outcome in my family. But as I said before, the seeds were there. There was not a good framework or understanding in my family about how to resolve conflict and how to support one another in areas of disagreement. And so over the years, as I grew in awareness and a little bit of maturity, I started seeing these patterns in my family and was really concerned about them. And I kind of became the lightning rod in my family, I guess, for highlighting issues and trying to work for resolution. And that was not usually received very well. I had the ability to do that with my father, but not with, my mother or my sister, which was very painful for me. And my father passed away when I was just a young woman, about 26 years old. And so my mother and sister were the only relationships I had left, and they were very, very important to me. We were, raised with a strong sense of family, a strong sense of duty and commitment to family. And then, of course, with Christian theology, which, as it was taught to me, really said that, we're always to forgive, we're always to, do our part in relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And so, um, throughout the years, throughout adulthood, and as I began my own family, the conflicts just exacerbated. And I was unable to find ways to pursue forgiveness, not just forgiveness, but reconciliation with my mother and my sister. And that was very painful.
Hmm. So yeah, talking about estrangement with the close ones, especially family members. So
Mhm.
it's sometimes it can be really hard to resolve. And um, if it's possible for you to just give us a little bit more, the how does it look like for you back then when you were a teenager, when you were even younger, that estrangement looks like, feel like for early young age, Diana.
Sure. As a teenager living in the home, it was more of like an emotional distance is how it started. I think I became very aware that we didn't share that I didn't share a lot of the same values um, as my mother and my sister. But it took a long time to see that because we were all professing Christians. We all went to church together and all of these things. And so I think for a long time, it was just really difficult for me to understand, the differences that were there. But moving into young adulthood, where we were outside of the home and making independent choices, those things became more clear. And there just wasn't a mechanism for acceptance and working through differences. And I think we just became more and more polarized until, after I had my children and my sister had her children, and there became some issues around child welfare, that were so big and so difficult that even though we tried to work through them, it really was like people on one side and people on another as far as what would be good for my sister's children. And we became, at that point where the contact that had always been strained for the last few years really just stopped once that situation was resolved. And you know, I've made a few efforts throughout the years. I guess that's been about almost 5 years now. I still have some very limited contact that is around, the needs of the children, but the relational aspect of, between myself and my mom and sister has really just, has ceased. And that was just something I never really expected to happen.
Right, right. Yeah, it sounds really, really tough in that situation. Almost like um, you force into that kind of a choice or make that boundary because the relationship in that dynamic is just unhealthy, and
Mhm.
sometimes it can be detrimental too. Um,
Yes.
yeah. So when you talk about the seeds of estrangement, especially embedded in the family, between family members, I see as you were talking about the effects. And what would you say the seeds of estrangement, just in general?
Mhm. Well, I do think that research is pretty clear about this as well, that when individuals or a family system or a larger system even has a difficulty in open expression of emotion and an ability to resolve conflict, that estrangement is much more likely. It's a common factor in every estrangement. We know that sinfulness is as well, right? Pride is a particularly relevant sin to estrangement where if people disagree and they cannot humble themselves to admit wrongs or to choose to love someone that disagrees with them, then estrangement is much more likely as well.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I can see those happen very often. Even
Mhm.
our in our own household, grow up. It's sometimes a lack of communication. Sometimes is the forgiveness piece is missing. Sometimes it's unresolved conflicts, as you mentioned about.
Yeah.
So yeah, I can see that. So how it began? Do you know? Um, when it
In my
began, where it began, how it began? Just
and healing it, is that what you mean?
uh again, still we are talking about
Oh,
estrangement. Yeah,
oh,
yeah,
where it begins?
yes.
Well, I think it really starts with a sense of um perhaps hopelessness in many cases, right? That
Mhm.
that conflicts could be resolved, or that a person will listen when you hurt. No matter what side of estrangement that you're on, whether you're the one walking away from a relationship, or you're the one who has been walked away from, it's intensely painful, and most people do not make that choice lightly. And
Right.
so it's a usually, in some cases, it seems like a very abrupt and sudden decision on someone's part, but
Mhm.
usually it is a long series of disappointments, pains and hurts that have built up and been
Right.
unresolved until hopelessness sets in on at least one party's part, that the relationship will ever, move forward in a healthy way.
Yes. Yes. As you were talking about in your case, it's between you and your parents, especially your mom. It's between the
Mhm.
children and the caregivers, adults. And it can happen in the intimate relationships as well, or couples. It could be in any relationships, right? Estrangement.
Absolutely. It happens between siblings very, very commonly.
Mhm.
Um, and also with extended family members, and, even with God, we can become
Yeah.
estranged.
Exactly. Exactly. So we will talk about that part in the later on episode. Uh, but today we are going to just focus on, what is estrangement, how did it happen in the family dynamic from your personal case. So as you were talking about, when the person disappointed to a degree and feels like despairing and giving up a hope for the relationship to be able to reconcile and become a healthy in that case, so the person just become more like distant from the relationship or
Mhm.
separated from the relationship and become estranged, and not willingly, but because the situation just, sometimes become worse. And
Right.
um, yeah, it's like what you said, it's not a decision being made lightly, and it's, being developed over time. Um, but I really don't see any way out or see the relationship can be reconciled, be changed in some ways. So,
Yes.
so what would you say where we are today in this estrangement situation?
Um, well, there's limited communication for me, with my family members, but, I think I referenced that earlier, that it's really around the care of the children that were the source of conflict, and the final source of conflict. And we have, needs that we have to communicate back and forth. And so there's some very limited communication there. But as far as our relationship, I still have hope for it. I am, still continually praying that the relationships will heal at some point, that all of us will find ways, that we could agree upon to move forward in a different way with one another. Um, but I think that it requires enough self-awareness on both parties' parts of what part they have played in an estrangement, to be able to do the hard work of reconciliation. Forgiveness has already occurred on my side. I can't speak for my family members, but reconciliation takes the participation of everyone, right?
Right.
And the desire of everyone to bring that about. And right now, that's not where my family is.
Mm, yeah, that's sad. I mean, I can tell from your our conversation, we
Mhm.
have, both known each other for several years. And I know your character, your personhood, your work, and I know you are more than willing to reconcile with the rest of the family, right?
Oh,
But
thank
like
you.
you said, it's relationship is not a one side. It takes both sides, willingness and be willing to work on the hard stuff and work through,
Mhm.
together. Yeah, I can see that. So,
Yeah, and if I could add to that just a moment, I think that many families are in a similar situation to mine when we were younger, right? Where we just don't maybe have the skill set,
mhm,
to address things. And that skill set can be learned, right? If you
right.
don't know how to resolve conflict, if you don't know how to share safely within the family about emotions or differences,
Mhm.
there are ways to learn those skills and to grow together in that. That doesn't have to be the end of the story, but it does require a willingness and a humility on everyone's part to acknowledge that that's part of the issue and be willing to learn.
Right, exactly. And I believe because of the experience that gave you this part of, I think, the motivation for you to learn to practice on your own and practice with others throughout those years. I mean, you're a high educated person, and now you're helping your clients to work through the estrangement, and that's
Yeah,
amazing. How God can utilize your experience and your skills to help others. Um, so I would agree with you, definitely. There's a hope. I mean, even though the situation is tough, but seek help. Dr. Diana and me as a therapist, we're here to help people, to heal from the past wounds and move on with their life and the possibility to reconcile the relationship if that's, moving toward the right
mm,
direction, right?
that's right.
Yeah,
Very much so.
yeah. So that's just wrapped up today's episode. What would you say the effects of estrangement that happened in, generally speaking, all relationships, and we touched on each of those aspects a little bit. And yeah, just summed up and give our audience, what's the effects of estrangement overall affect, not just personally, also in the corporate setting, a bigger family and ripped
Mhm.
out, outside of the family, in a community. So would you give us, yeah, a summarization of this estrangement?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is such a critical thing to understand is that estrangement doesn't just happen between two people. It is something that happens to families. It is something that happens to communities, as you said, and workplaces and countries.
Mhm.
Um, right. And that brokenness has a lot of specific and widespread effects throughout, all of those levels of society. For instance, we know, that people who have experienced estrangement in any way, whether they're the ones that walked away or the ones who, have been walked away from, that they often experience a loss of identity, self-esteem, sense of shame and guilt, difficulty trusting others, and a withdrawal from other relationships as an effect of the estrangement.
Mhm.
And when you think about all of the, outcomes from those effects, it's disastrous for many people. Makes it very difficult if they're not able to pursue healing and have support through an estrangement. It can have um, an effect that literally changes the trajectory of their lives. We see this in workplaces where the emotional climate becomes very unhealthy.
Mhm.
We see it in churches. We see it between, feuding countries where communication breaks down, understanding and empathy and trust, become so eroded that there seems no way to go forward together. So this is a critical issue for us and
Yes,
the church.
absolutely. I'm glad that you point this out. Once we had this broken relationship, estrangement, and the distrust and the hurt, if we don't heal from that place, really, even as adult, no matter how old we are, we can still feel stuck and disconnect with the rest of the world and don't feel belonging, right?
That's right.
And even sometimes when people say, hey, I'm in the crowds, I have people around me, but they still feel lonely. So deep inside that brokenness and start from the, the estrangement from our close ones from early young age. And those wounds needs to be healed, right? And in order for us to move on to have a healthy relationships. So yeah. And I'm so glad you pointed this out. Also, how we develop our self-image, our self-value, self-worth. You mentioned about no self-esteem, those issues. Those all come along, started from relationship, how we perceive ourselves and judge the world also,
Yes.
So today we are touching on the topic of estrangement, and in the next couple episodes, we're going to dive in deeper from Dr. Diana, her clinical work, her research, and to talk more about this issue in our society. And the next episode, we are going to talk about how estrangement happened in the Bible, what God's view and what Bible tells us how to deal with estrangement. So thank you, Dr. Diana, for today spending time with us.
Well, thank you, Marie. This was a wonderful opportunity, and I hope that it will be helpful to others.
Yes, definitely.